to everyone and welcome to a new edition of the STA Smart Talks. My name is José Papí. I am the host of these Smart Talks, being the president of the Smart Transportation Alliance. And today we are having a very, very interesting open discussion about the future of infrastructure financing in Europe. And actually, why do I say that this is interesting beyond the importance of the topics? It's because I have with me today two extraordinary experts in the field, Professor Manuel Vassallo, who is the member of the Transport Research Center TRANSyT at the Technical University of Madrid, UPM, and accompanying him, I have Professor Thierry Vanelslander, who is a member of the Faculty of Business and Economics of the University of Antwerp. They are a part of the STA community, two world-class experts on the topic, and I welcome them to the podcast. José Manuel, Thierry, how are you?
We are fine, José. Thank you very much for the praise and for the invitation. We don't deserve such a good words, but we are happy to be here sharing some minutes with you to discuss about infrastructure financing.
Thank you very much.
And also on my side, I'm very happy to be able to join here in this session and to share some insights on transport infrastructure finance.
So as you can see, our two guests today are modest, humble people, but I have no shame. And I just say that I know how much knowledgeable they are about this topic. And well, we have structured the discussion around 6 questions that we have agreed earlier as a matter of structuring a bit the debate. And then I propose, well, that you will be seeing, our esteemed followers, you will be seeing these questions on the screen. And this is the first question that I'm going to air to our esteemed guest today. There was a study, a survey, actually, that we conducted in 2018 in the Smart Transportation Alliance, and we got answers from the expert community. 111 transport experts answered, and over half of the respondents, 65% specifically, believed that the European infrastructures are not cost effective. This is a very severe statement from the transport community, and I will ask, dear Thierry, maybe you can give us your view on the topic.
Yeah, well, I must admit I'm not so surprised by the figure. I think European funding for infrastructure is a great thing, is a big necessity, more than ever, I would say, because in many cases we have a backlog in infrastructure investment. At the same time, we see also from other sources, like the European Court of Auditors, for instance, that there are big issues with the cost effectiveness of the infrastructure investments and, for instance, also the European subsidies or grants given there. And we've done some research into that together with the European Court of Auditors. And if I look, for instance, to the domain of my first interest, my first love, I would say, which is the ports, the seaports, there we see that indeed quite a big share of the infrastructure projects are lagging behind or are performing sub-level, below the level that they should perform in terms of cost effectiveness. And this has to do with various things very often. It has to do with too much bureaucracy, for instance. It has to do with the fact that sometimes funds are used for projects which even beforehand already are said to be able or not to be able to deliver up to the standards that they promise in documents and submission files, etc. So there is various issues that make that quite some of these projects in the end underperform or even highly underperform.
Thank you very much, Thierry, for this view, which is, well, you share what this community of experts expressed back in the day. José Manuel, what would be your take on this subject?
Yes, so I mean, complementing what Thierry said, I have to acknowledge that the first time I read this question, I was a little bit confused because I kept in mind the term cost, not cost effectiveness, but cost efficiency. So I think that, I mean, construction companies in Europe are efficient. I am sure of that. But then I realized that the term that appears in this question is not about efficiency, but about effectiveness. And I think, and I want to add up to what Thierry said before, that I guess that basically the idea is that we are not allocating the funds to the right type of infrastructure, no? In other words, no? We are maybe investing too much in certain aspects and we are missing some other aspects, no? For instance, one of the greatest problems, I guess, is there is little investment related to improving the connection across European countries, despite the fact that the European Union is expected to work as a whole. There is also a problem with the imbalance between the investment that is conducted more in passenger transport compared to freight, no? In many cases, freight is still not effective, no? And there is a lack of infrastructure to facilitate intermodal connection. So, I mean, basically, this is what I want to comment on that, no? My impression is that, I mean, we maybe are doing things well once the project is developed, but maybe we are not doing things well at the planning process, at the time of deciding which infrastructure is the priority compared to other.
Thank you very much, José Manuel, for your take on the matter. We can see indeed that the Trans-European network, which was a great idea, a great political idea, I must say at the time, it has a lot of technical, financial difficulties to be put together and brought to reality. And then I imagine also that the political realms is also influencing a lot in this lack of cost effectiveness, in my opinion. So, well, thank you so much for these two very interesting insights that you have shared with the audience. Let's move then to the second question. In the same survey that I referred to earlier, 55% of the transport experts declare that users are completely unaware of the real cost of infrastructures, that people don't have an adequate perception on how much does it take in terms of resources to supply such an important societal asset. José Manuel, do you concur to what our transport experts answered in that survey?
I mean, I'm really surprised why it was not 100%, because my impression is that actually users are really unaware of the real cost of infrastructure. And that's something that we think about, no? Because at the end of the day, I mean, civil engineering infrastructure is very, very much capital intensive. I mean, it is also right that nowadays infrastructure is not just about concrete and bricks and steel, no? I mean, we have to consider as well ICT infrastructure and other type of smart infrastructure that maybe it's very important and it is not so costly. Anyway, I think it is crucial that the society is aware or be aware of the real cost of that, no? And I'm thinking that that might be achieved, for instance, providing just general figures, no? That are easy to understand by the people, no? I'm thinking in a certain country, how much it is paid in roads, in road maintenance, or in road, including both construction and maintenance per person. That's a good idea. I mean, the cost is it 10 euros? It is 100 euros, because that way somebody would actually realize how much of their taxes is going to be devoted to that. And along with that, I think it is interesting to show the idea that the cost of the lack of investment, no? If, for instance, the maintenance of the network is not adequate, that has also a cost in terms of higher operation cost of the vehicle, higher accident cost, etc. So I think that having these figures to be digested by the population, I mean, in the way they can do it, it's something very important.
Thank you very much, José Manuel. And indeed, it's a practice in Nordic Scandinavian politics. It is a practice that the politicians appear in the parliaments and basically present this investment will be 300 euros per capita in our country. And I like a lot your idea. Thierry, what would be your take on this subject?
Well, I agree with what José Manuel just said, basically also in respect to taxes and transparency on the use of those taxes, public money for infrastructure investments. I would like to add a point with respect to pricing also towards the user. I think in Europe in general, we have very little culture of passing on the cost of such investments also into pricing to users. There are exceptions, of course, with highways which are being tolled, but then there is another problem in the sense that the pricing system applied there is often not linked to the marginal cost of the additional user that will come to that infrastructure, but is again very untransparent. Yeah? It's very hard to say what the price is based on. And in some cases, we know it's basically monopolists which are operating certain parts of the network. And the question then is whether they are enough regulated and whether their prices are enough regulated by public authorities. And that's also a point, I think, where Europe can still do a lot. It's good to leave things to the market, but then the government needs to be aware that it needs to be a very strict and a very good regulator, because in the end, it's public good, it's public money that is also being spent there. And I think these are 2 points which are lacking. So the fact that pricing, direct pricing, is often not applied. So there is no incentive for the user to be aware about the cost that is behind. It's coming from the general pot of money. And then second, also, the fact that if there is pricing, it's often not based on the marginal cost. So it's very untransparent. And again, there is no link to be made with the real cost that is behind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thierry. Actually, your comment or your answer is very, very interesting, because this leads us to the third question. And in the third question, when we ask the transport experts who they think should be the level of authority that should boost better infrastructure financing in Europe, curiously enough, the national governments were not mentioned first. It was the European Union that was mentioned first. And we have made some comments before about the Trans-European network and how it has not become a full reality across Europe. And I am wondering, do you believe this has changed, that we are still looking at this supranational entity to, I would not say regulate, but at least to steer and frame the way we work across Europe in this topic?
Yeah, if I may react to that, I think that I'm not that surprised, in the sense that maybe in Europe, the European involvement has become a bit internalized. I mean, people, authorities, companies even expect that Europe intervenes in the financing. And of course, Europe has set up a number of big projects. Think about the TEN-T network developments, which they are financing. Think about the specific funds they have set up for rail, also for navigation, for instance. So big flows of money are going in that direction. And I think because of that, many parties tend to forget that it's still a basic duty of national governments, national authorities, to keep up these infrastructures. And linked to that also, we have seen in the past years, past decades already even, that often due to budget cuts, due to other needs and priorities, national governments have reduced spending on public transport infrastructure in various ways. And of course, the tricky thing with that is that for politicians, it's an easy thing to cut, because you don't notice the bad effects in the short run. They only come in the longer run, so for the next generations of policymakers. So you can score, let's say, as a politician in the short run, and it's then the next generations that will suffer from that lack of funding. So I think this twofold characteristic makes that I'm not that surprised. And today, I'm convinced that the opinions would be still more or less the same. Although we see that national governments start to become aware, and they also publicize that a bit more. But I'm convinced that the majority of the parties involved still finds, or at least a large part of the parties involved, still find that the European level should intervene to quite a high extent.
Thank you very much, Thierry, for this take on the subject. José Manuel, what's your view in this? Do we need the European Union to lead us in this topic?
So I fully agree with the answer to this question. I mean, maybe the point is not to lead, but I mean, if you look at the question, basically says which actor should play a more active role. So my impression is at the end of the day, this may be a question about what type of role is playing nowadays. So my impression is that while governments, national governments, they are playing quite an active role nowadays, the European Commission and the EU is not doing what it should. I mean, there is still quite a lot of work to do in that respect. No? And basically, it comes from the fact that actual infrastructure policy, it is a type of policy that has not been devoluted to the European Union. In other words, it is still a decision of the member states. But what we realize is that at the end of the day, to promote the common market and to promote all the countries of the EU to work like a single country, it is essential to promote a type of infrastructure planning that considers Europe as a whole. No? So that has been intended with the Trans-European Network Policy, but things, as you mentioned, José, previously, are not working well. No? Why? Because still the projects that need a lot of investment, such as the cross-border projects, are not being prioritized. So in that respect, it is important, it is crucial that the European Union plays a greater role in order to promote that. And basically, they can do it through restricting the financing to those countries that clearly they are not supporting the projects that have an interest from the European perspective. And that's something that there is still a high way to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, José Manuel. Actually, I am aligned with what you say. And if I may add, also in the Treaty of the European Union, there is an article inside the Trans-European Network, the 10T section, that says that the European Union will provide for the technical interoperability of all the networks. And it is clearly stated there. And I mean, we can see that still there are very different standards in the way our highways, our ports, our railways operate. And that is clearly visible, no, from a normal driver that is driving from Spain to France, then to Belgium, then to the Netherlands. And you see all the changes in the infrastructure just in your car. And it's something that is visible for any citizen, no? But moving into the fourth question, José Manuel, it seemed that there was a perception that tolls and fares in this survey, tolls and fares were considered like a suitable funding option for roads, railways, and airports, while the state budget option was what was considered for, let's say, those modes that have this tainting of sustainability and public service, like railways and urban transport. So what do you think of this?
So that's a very good question. And actually that links with what Thierry said in a previous question that was made. No? The whole issue about transportation pricing, it's a very interesting field from the planning and from the research perspective. No? So I think that it is one of the fields where there is a greater gap between what researchers agree and what is applied in practice. No? So at the end of the day, what we have to understand is that pricing has different goals. No? The first one, of course, is collecting money for the sake of financing infrastructure facilities. Then you have the second one that is basically about internalizing externalities. No? And the third one is about providing incentives for the right decision-taking by users and operators. No? That's the threefold goal. Taking into account that, we have to consider as well that all the transportation modes, they cooperate and they compete. So distortions in prices can have bad consequences on the efficiency and effectiveness of the transport network. So having said that, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, we cannot say that tolls and the users have to pay for some modes and other modes have to be subsidized. I think that what we have to do is to study each one of the modes specifically in itself and also in its relationship with the rest of the modes to define what is the right price, considering also the positive externalities. I fully agree that, for instance, urban railways, they are playing a crucial role because they have very, very high positive externality, so they have to be subsidized, and that they can be also cross-subsidized by other modes. But the point I think it is missing is that there is no study about that. And also there is an important aspect, and is that the fiscal situation of different modes is not coordinated. No? For instance, the fuel that is used for cars, for road cars and for trucks, has a high taxation rate, while this same fuel, if it is used for the rail, has no taxation. So at the end of the day, what we lack is really an integrated model that defines in a clear way what part of the cost should be covered by the users, which part should be covered by subsidies, and which are the reasons on the grounds of which those aspects or those policies are being implemented.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with the point that Juan Manuel made. It's about correct pricing. It's about indeed correctly internalizing also externalities, which today unfortunately happens way not often enough, and that again makes the user unaware about the negative impacts that he or she also has on society, with contributing to congestion, contributing to emissions, contributing to noise problems, accidents, etc. And that is, of course, a big problem, because we want to solve, and we need to solve today, a lot of these issues. Most European countries, and especially urban environments, suffer from big congestion, and today there is by far not enough incentive for the user to be aware about this. On the contrary, it's again then with public governments who think that they need to invest in even expanding further the network, which will lead, without correct pricing, to further attracting more traffic and even more congestion in the end. And the same goes with emissions, noise, and accidents in the end. We know that transportation, unfortunately, is one of the sectors contributing most to CO2 emissions, for instance. So if we want to solve that, we will need to make the user aware and change their behavior. And the only way to really do this is by looking where the causes of these problems and putting the correct price to that. And I also agree with Juan Manuel that equal pricing principles should be applied to all modes of transport. Today, too often, we see a competition for subsidies, let's say. We see, for instance, competition between inland navigation and railways, where inland navigation is available. That means one government agency, one government level is giving subsidies to inland navigation. Another one is giving even more subsidies, trying to attract more traffic to rail. And then inland navigation sees again that they need more subsidies, so they go and claim more subsidies with their responsible government. So you get competition for subsidies. And in the end, what does not happen is what should happen, namely driving away, pulling away traffic from the roads. That is not happening. So I'm convinced that equal pricing principles, and I again refer to the marginal cost pricing also, should be applied to the different modes of transport. And that is very often lacking today. And I remain convinced that this is the key if we want to answer, if we want to solve a number of these big problems relating to externalities also.
Thank you very much, Thierry, for this take, and also to José Manuel. It is true that we see that politics, ideology, I would say, sometimes it interferes, no, with the best practices that you, the experts, you are perceiving in the market and you are studying in your day-to-day research work. Well, let's move to the fifth question. PPPs, public-private partnerships. It was a concept that became very fashionable some years ago. I wonder how it has flown in Europe. A topic that we highlighted in the studies, that it seemed to be a concern amongst the expert community, that the public sector was not fully aware of the legislative damage that they could make to the investors if they decided to change their take or their view on the legislation, the regulation that surrounds a PPP. No? So in that sense, that survey showed that contract design and risk distribution were critical aspects for the success of a PPP contract, but the regulator, the legislator, was all the time seen as a worrying factor in the whole scheme, in the whole equation. Thierry, what's your take on this matter?
Well, I think on the question whether the public sector should be responsible or most responsible when it comes to legislative risks, I think the answer is fully yes. It should even be fully responsible, because by definition, legislation is a public thing. So there is no other party that can be responsible for this. It's another matter if we talk about other types of risks, commercial risks, for instance. I think there the private parties involved in such PPPs can and should contribute also. But if we talk about legislative risks, risks dealing with the policies being put into place, this is really a public matter. So I think there fully the government should be responsible. And I agree with respect to the last points also put here on this slide about contract design, about risk distribution. They are key indeed for the success of PPPs, because if the distribution of risks is wrong, then again, you give wrong incentives to the various parties involved, and that will end up in over or under investment and also a wrong pricing very often. We have seen that from many studies we have done on public-private partnerships in transportation in the past. It's crucial to give the right incentives. And I would like to come back again to the point also here. The government needs to be a good regulator. It's not a matter of leaving investments just to the markets, and that will not be the holy grail for getting things solved. The government will still need to be involved, will need to remain involved as a good regulator. First of all, in the contract design stage and the design of the entire project setting, but also later on in the monitoring and the follow-up, because it's not because a contract has started that things will run well eternally, of course. Yeah? The operator may change behavior, the market will change also, and therefore also interventions by public authorities may be needed still. And I think that's largely lacking still today. Very often, government sees private involvement as a solution for many things, also in transport infrastructure, and that can be partly true, but not without the government remaining involved.
Thank you very much. José Manuel, what's your take on the matter?
Yes, so I mean, I subscribe what basically Thierry said, and I wanted to add something. I mean, I was looking at the figures about PPPs in Europe, and the amount of PPPs and the value of PPPs over the last few years is going down. And that's really something to be concerned about, no? Because the EU is the place where they were born. And nowadays you see many more PPPs in Asia, in the United States, in Latin America, everywhere, but not in Europe. So I think that one of the reasons, and I want to add to what Thierry said, it has to do at the end of the day with the deficit rules of the accounting deficit rules of Eurostat. They are playing an important role on that, no? Basically because they are putting all the stress of a contract to be considered off balance on the fact that most of the risk have to be allocated to the private sector. And that is not always the best thing in a PPP. As Thierry mentioned, we should define the risk allocation in such a way that the incentives are the right ones. So nowadays we see many PPP projects in Europe where the amount of risk that is allocated to the private sector is somehow too high. At the end of the day, that makes the project more expensive. As it is more expensive, governments consider that PPPs are more expensive. So at the end of the day, I think we have to make a reflection to reformulate how we are accounting investment guarantees in the public deficit. Because to me, that has an importance, not just on how it is accounted, but on how contracts are being designed and drafted in terms of risk allocation.
And actually, it is most surprising that Europe was the leading force in the world of infrastructural PPPs, with European companies topping the top 10 largest world transport operators for many, many years. And now, precisely where everything was born, let's say the amount of PPPs is decreasing. This is most surprising. Well, maybe this will lead us to the last question. We have a fashionable concept now on the table, taxonomy. It's some people have been confused, and that's why we have launched a number of episodes of this STA Smart Talks on distinguishing what are the environmental requirements and what is the EU taxonomy, which is not the same. The EU taxonomy, let's say, it's a kind of quote unquote certificate that you get on the project that you have at hand. And with this certificate, you can go to banks and other financial institutions to obtain funding for your infrastructure. Sorry, I am formulating this in a very colloquial manner, probably not the most precise, but I guess it's for the sake of it being understood by our followers, no? So, José Manuel, do you believe the EU taxonomy is going to have a positive, a negative influence, a neutral influence on how infrastructures will be funded in the future by national governments or EU bodies like the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, the structural funds, etc., etc.?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, and timely question. So I think that the impact of the EU taxonomy is going to be huge, mostly because sustainable finance is on fashion nowadays. Everyone wants to be sustainable. So that's going to be kind of the certificate that your investment is sustainable. As a consequence of that, that can be channeled through sustainable finance. It's going to have a big impact, but you asked me whether the impact will be good or not. So, I mean, I think the taxonomy is necessary and it should be for the good. But according to how the taxonomy is designed nowadays, I think it is missing some key points. No? The first point is that something is sustainable not just because it is green. First of all, because sustainability has to do with economic, environmental and social aspects at the same time, and they need a counterbalance. No? So to speak, something very green, but that costs like 10 times other solution, to me, it is not sustainable. And that's something we have to put on the table. And the second point is because excluding something just for the sake of being something doesn't mean it is not sustainable. So for instance, no? You may you may, for instance, organize the maintenance of a road in such a way that reduces quite a lot CO2 emissions because just reduces operation costs, or just you build a new stretch of a road that is saving a lot of kilometers, it is saving CO2 emissions. But that's not considered sustainable because it is not electric, it is not green hydrogen, it is not so. I mean, of course, I have nothing against, just the other way around, about these kind of technologies that I guess are crucial. And of course, they should be considered a green financing or sustainable financing. But of course, we shouldn't keep aside other type of measures that are also contributing to reducing CO2 emissions. So to me, at the end of the day, actually, I went to the bank a couple of weeks ago and they asked me, do you want to invest in sustainable finance? And the own guy who was advising me told me, I mean, take into account that this sustainable doesn't mean necessarily that it's so sustainable. So basically I acknowledged that and I said, you are right. I'm not so certain that things I am investing, when it is called sustainable finance, it is so sustainable, because at the end of the day, we are just financing some specific technologies that the Commission, and they are on fashion, that the Commission likes, but we are not so sure to what extent they are contributing to sustainable finance. So that's my perspective.
Thank you very much, José Manuel, for it. I actually have acknowledged how many elements that are currently worked by contractors and other companies are not taken into consideration in the taxonomic guides. It's most surprising, and I wonder if there has been a lack of dialogue with the real experts in the sector and also with the people that are doing the day-to-day construction, operations and maintenance of infrastructures, because there's indeed a listing of futuristic and very positive probably technologies, but the day-to-day work and the efforts that have been going on, for instance, if I speak about roads, in some of the road equipments that are configuring today's infrastructures, they are not even considered, and there has been a very important reduction in the environmental footprint. There are more strict methods of implementing, for instance, pavements into the roads. And there's a lot of effort that has been done that is not even by these taxonomy guys. Thierry, do you concur with the vision of our esteemed José Manuel?
Yes, I do concur indeed. I think it's important to set a framework, which now the European Commission has done, and I think that's a good starting point, knowing that, like any framework, it's never perfect and it needs maintenance, I would say. New insights will come, also scientifically, and I think those will need to be added. So that means the taxonomy will need to be flexible. And another very important point will again be monitoring. It's not because you devise such a taxonomy that automatically everything that comes after, by definition, will be sustainable, even if you have a fixed definition about that. You may end up with some examples of greenwashing, where on paper everything is sustainable, and it's also sold like that, and therefore it complies with the European taxonomy as being sustainable. But in the end result may not be that sustainable. So there again, the government will need to pay attention to these situations like greenwashing, for instance, and monitoring will remain important there to see whether what is delivered in the end also matches with what is promised, and that it's not only a green promise, but also a green result in the end. I think that's a big challenge for government, and to be aware about.
Well, thank you very much, Thierry, for your take on this topic. I think the roundtable has been most informative for me, and it also shows a case in which I believe that scientific principles, scientific takes and evidences should be brought into the table for the betterment of today's infrastructures. No, sometimes there's a lot of ideology, there's a lot of politics, if you allow me to say it this way, and having this expert view on where we are and where we could go is much, much needed. So I can only thank you, José Manuel, Thierry, for your participation in this podcast. It's been a true honor for the Smart Transportation Alliance to have these two, sorry, I will say it again, I know you will disagree, but these two luminaries in the world of transport financing. And let's say that I imagine this could be only the first of our debates, and maybe we can have future editions if there's an interest from the audience. So maybe one last word, if you want, José Manuel, you first, and then Thierry to close the podcast.
Okay, so I wanted to thank STA for the organization of those smart talks. That I think it's a great idea, and I hope you continue with that. And then insist that this topic of transportation financing and particularly infrastructure is crucial, and we have to keep on working on that, no? Because in the last few years, I mean, everything is about technology, but at the end of the day, technology cannot be developed if we have very good sources of financing and finding ways, no, to channel all the resources to things that will improve infrastructure. So thank you very much, José.
Thank you, José Manuel. Thierry, you will close the episode yourself.
Okay. Well, a last thing I would like to add is something we just touched upon. I think the contribution that science can bring here is enormous, and there is already a lot of research available. And I noticed that it's not always taken up by policymakers, and of course, it is their good right to do so, but then they should also bear the consequences, I would say. But there is really a lot of good research available, and also currently a lot being done. There are lots of European projects that also deal with transport infrastructure finance, for instance, transport infrastructure investments. So I think it's really worthwhile for policymakers to have a good look into this and to take lessons that are taken from this. And then following up on the point that José Manuel just made, I think, like I said earlier, also, there will be even much bigger needs in the future for the right transport infrastructure. It's a key input to economic development. It's a key input to social welfare also. So I think it's really important that governments take good decisions here. And of course, that they are aware that it's public money often that is involved, tax money. So it should be well spent, and it should be well considered. And that would be my concluding words for this session.
Thank you very much, Thierry. Again, my gratitude to both of you. participating in today's roundtable. My gratitude to the STA Secretariat for putting together all the necessary infrastructure to make this happen. And well, see you soon in another episode of the STA Smart Talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.